Hey guys, Jocelyn here with Fantasia Elegance. In this video I'm going to be showing you how to make this very pretty and quick ring design. It does use a single focal cabochon. I will be using an 8mm round one. You could also substitute oval or increase or decrease the size slightly. For wire, I'm going to be using copper wire that I got from riogrande.com. I'm going to be using a 20 gauge square and also 20 gauge half round. If you don't have square wire, you could try using 18 gauge round wire. Again, I do recommend using the half round because we're going to be wrapping that around the ring band, and it'll just make it more comfortable than using round wire. Of course, you'll want some standard tools: ring mandrel, chain nose pliers, round nose pliers, flush cutter, and a ruler to measure wire with. Do check out the description section if you're curious about the exact brands I'm using and where you can purchase those. So as we get started, let's cut some lengths of wire. I've pulled out my 20 gauge square here. I'm just going to wind some lengths of that off of the spool and straighten it a little bit as I go. I do like to use a jewelry cleaning cloth to help me with straightening because that will clean it as well. I can leave a link in the description section below for what kind of cloth I'm using if anyone's curious about that. But I'm just going to straighten off a pretty long length of this. We're going to be cutting 3 separate pieces of our 20 gauge square wire. So I will be giving measurements for a size 7 ring. If you're making larger or smaller, you will need to scale up or down accordingly. But for a size 7 ring, I'm going to cut 3 pieces that are 6.5 inches long each. For those of you in metric, that's going to be just about 16.5 centimeters. So we'll cut 3 of those. There's 1, there's 2, here's 3. And if you were sizing up or down, I would recommend increasing or decreasing these wire lengths by about 1/4 inch for each ring size up or down that you go. But again, for size 7, we've got 3 pieces of 6.5 inch each. And pulling out my half round wire, we're going to need quite a long piece of this as well. I'll just wind that off the spool. Again, for a size 7 ring, we're going to want about 26 inches of this. And we'll just cut that off there. So with your square wires, I'm just going to get these all straightened out so that they can sit easily right next to each other and run parallel to each other. So if they have any little kinks or wiggles, you want to adjust those out so they can all sit next to each other nicely. Now what we're going to do, the very center of these wires is going to become the center bottom of our ring band. So that's going to be the center of those wires right there. And we're going to wrap this half round wire around, having that wrap centered again on the middle portion of the band. So you can eyeball this, which honestly is what I usually do. I would kind of mentally divide this into thirds along the length and start wrapping 1/3 in. If you wanted to be scientific and know exactly where to start wrapping your half round wire, I can show you how to do that as well. What you want to do is look up the circumference of whatever ring size you're trying to make. And I have a handy chart, well, I found a handy chart for that online. I will again link that in the description section below. But if you head over there, you can look up that a US size 7 ring is 54.5 millimeters in circumference. And what we want to do is subtract from that the diameter of our stone that we're going to be using. So I will subtract 8 millimeters from that. And we get, of course, 46.5 millimeters. And then with this, we want to divide it by 2, okay? And we will get 23 millimeters if we do that. So that is the distance out from the center of our 6.5 inch square wires that we want to start wrapping. So what I'm going to do is pull out my ruler and a fine tip Sharpie, and I'm just going to mark the center of these wires, so at 3.25 inches. I'll just draw a mark across there, and then we want to go out 23 millimeters from either side of that. Okay, so switching over to metric side, I'm going to mark at 23 millimeters, and we'll do the same thing on the other side of the center mark. And now that is where we want to wrap our half round wire, is between these 2 marks right here. But again, you don't have to go through all that. If you just want to eyeball in about 1/3 of the way along here, that works perfectly well too. Basically what we're going to do is take our long length of half round wire that we've got. I'm just going to give myself about 2 inches or so from the end, and lay that over that mark we just made. Again, keeping all of these square wires lined up so the ends are even with each other. And I'm just going to start wrapping this half round wire very tightly around all 3 of these square wires. And after you get one wrap in, you might want to use your chain nose pliers to just flatten that on down. Make sure your starting wraps are nice and tight there, making sure that it's again staying over that little mark we made. And I'm just going to continue wrapping that around. You might find it easier to turn all your square base wires over and over to wrap it, just like that. Every 3 wraps or so, I'm going to use my chain nose pliers to squeeze it on down, make sure everything is tight and secure. And we're just going to continue doing that, again turning these square base wires to wrap the half round around them. Of course, you want the flat side of the half round to be against the base wires and the domed part to be sitting out. And every 3 wraps or so, I'm just going to squeeze that on down and tighten everything together. And we're just going to continue that until we get to that other mark we made, or if you're eyeballing it, until you have about equal distances of unwrapped wires on either side. Okay, so what we should have now is our wrapped length, and that should be perfectly centered in the middle of our square base wires. Now go ahead and pull out your ring mandrel. What we're going to do is start shaping this around to our desired size. Now frequently with rings you want to wrap them a little larger than you want your desired final thing to be. As you can see, we do have some of these square wires wrapping around the band going inside, and that will make it a little bit smaller. However, I do find that this tends to loosen up ever so slightly as I'm wrapping it. So for me, I just go ahead and wrap it directly on the size I want. I do recommend the first time you're making this using some inexpensive materials, just so you can get a feel for if it's going to turn out, a little larger or smaller than you want it to. That will help you know where to wrap for future ones. But again, I'm just going to go ahead and wrap on the size 7 because that is the final size that I want. And go ahead and cross your right hand wires above the left hand wires. So we want the right ones going over top. It doesn't really matter, that will just help you follow along a little bit more easily with what I'm doing. Okay, so we've got right going over top of the left hand wires, right on the size 7. And what we want to have here is that where these 2 wires cross over each other and are not wrapped around with the round wire, we want that to be approximately the width of our stone that we're going to be using. So our stone's going to sit right there, as you can see, like that. So go ahead and pull that off of the ring mandrel. So at this point what we're going to do, I'll just get this little tail out of the way for now, and with this longer tail that we still have of the half round, I'm going to wrap all 6 of these wires together where they cross over each other right at the top center of our ring. I'm just going to feed this tail through the ring like that. Again, being careful to keep the flat side of the half round wire towards the square wires, and making sure that that wrap is sitting right next to our previous wraps. I'm just encouraging that with my chain nose pliers. And then we're going to bring it up and over all 6 of these square wires. Just like that. Okay. And then feeding it again through the center of the ring. I'm going to tighten that wrap on down. Okay, and we're just going to keep wrapping like that until we get to this other side. So feeding it through again, and tightening it with our chain nose pliers. Alright, and you probably want to have about 6 or 7 of those wraps. I'm happy with how 6 is looking. Again, you can just sit your stone on there and double check what it's going to look like. I think that is a pretty good little platform for it. So we'll stop there, and what you can do is pull slightly on these tails to kind of tighten that ring down and bring the wraps together. So I'm just going to do that, and as I'm tensioning it slightly, I'm just going to bend these 3 wires up slightly, right at that wrapping point, and we'll do the same thing on the other side, just bending it up slightly. That will kind of help this from springing back apart. So we've got 3 on each side. Let's go ahead and finish off these half round wires so they're out of the way. What I'm going to do is pinch that on down, make sure it's tight. I'm just going to snip this off with my flush cutters so that it can sit on the top of the ring band right there. That way it will not be scratching your finger as you wear this. So let me just snip that off. And we will tighten that end, pushing it down against all those square base wires. Then we have this other end. I'm just going to do the same thing, bringing it up over top so that it's not scratching your finger. And I'll snip that off and push that one down against the square wires as well. Okay, so we finished off that half round wire, and we have created a little spot for our stone to sit right in the center there. So now, as you can see, we've got 2 sets of 3 wires going off on either side. What I'm going to do is kind of separate these out, so the bottom wire on the left hand side and the top wire on the right hand side, I'm just going to separate out from these other pairs slightly. Okay, and then the outermost wire on each side, so the bottom wire on the right hand side, I'm going to twist. And since we're using square wire, that is going to create a really pretty pattern. So I'm just going to hold the ring in my left hand and grip the end of that square wire with the pliers in my right hand, and I'm just going to start turning it and turning it to start putting a twist in that wire. And I'm going to keep going until it's a pretty tight twist pattern. I think that looks best. So we should have something like that now. Really pretty twist pattern in there. I'm going to do the same thing with the top wire on the left hand side. So both of our outermost wires will be twisted. Again, just gripping that with my chain nose pliers and twisting the ring around with my left hand. And I'm just going to go eyeballing it until I have a similar looking tightness in the twist as I did on the first one. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so you should have something that looks like that now. And again, on the left hand side I've got the top 2 wires, and on the right hand side I've got the bottom 2 wires kind of separated out from these middle ones. Now it's time to put our stone in, so I'm just going to pull out my little labradorite that I'm using and sit it right there in that space we made. And this part can be a little bit tricky, so just take it slow if you need to. I'm just going to hold this stone in with my left hand fingers, keeping it centered right in that spot, and we're going to use these 2 sets of wires to wrap over it and secure that stone. So what I'm going to do is take the right hand lower wires, and I'm going to wrap them from right to left, kind of going from bottom to top of the stone. So I'm going to, again, pinching with my left hand to hold that stone in place. I'm going to use my right hand thumb to kind of push those wires over, going from right to left. And they're just going to kind of swoop over on top of that stone. And we're going to kind of mirror image that with these left wires. We're going to take them from left to right. Again, just pushing them over, coming from left to right, around, swooping around the bottom of that stone. So you can see we're starting to encapsulate it. I'm just going to continue that motion, wrapping them around to encase the stone. Okay, so we should have something like that now. And at this point, go ahead and double check that your stone is secured. As you can see here, those wires are sitting pretty high up on the stone, so I want to push them down a little bit so that they are securing the side of it a little bit better. And let's check here as well. And that way they also won't cover so much of the face of the stone, which is very pretty. We don't want to cover that up so much that it can't be seen. And what I also like to do is just separate the twisted wire out from the other one slightly. That will give us a little bit more coverage to hold the stone in place. So instead of having them running completely smack next to each other, I'm just going to separate them out ever so slightly. And we'll do that on this side too, mainly by pushing the untwisted wire down a little bit more. Okay, so that's what we're having now. And at this point, to secure everything in place, I'm just going to take both of these wires on each side, stick them, start wrapping them around, going through the center of the ring to secure everything down. So I'm going to push them so that the stone is very tightly secured. I'm going to hold that together with my left hand, and then I'm going to use my chain nose pliers to just push both of those tails through the ring here. And I'm just going to wrap them around the ring band right below this wire that we haven't done anything with yet. Okay, and you can kind of use your chain nose pliers to push them up, securing that against the band. So I've got one pretty tight wrap there. Let's do the same thing on the other side with these unsecured wires. So again, making sure it is tight, holding everything in place with my left hand. I'm just going to use the chain nose pliers to tuck those ends through the ring, pull them back around, and just tighten everything down against the band. And now just double checking our stone is still sitting where we want it to, and it is more or less encased in these wires. That looks pretty good. So at this point, let's deal with these longer center wires that we haven't done anything with yet. What we're going to do is place some little swirls right next to the stone, as you can see here. We're going to do these center swirls right next to the stone, just to kind of fill in these little gaps on the sides of where those swoopy wires go, to further secure the stone and also decorate it a little bit. So I'm just going to take this right hand one, kind of bring it over, laying it into that space there, okay, and flipping this over, we'll do the same thing with the other one, just pushing it over so it can sit in that space where we want it to. There we go. And then we have a little bit more length on these than what we're going to need because I want to make some really tiny little swirls. So I'm just going to snip these off maybe about, I don't know, 2 centimeters or so out from where they come out from under the stone. There we go. And you can save these little pieces to make other things with. Little swirls or ornaments. I like to save all my wire. So about 2 centimeters out. We'll just mark that spot and snip it off there. A little longer for some reason. There we go. And now what we're going to do is take the very tip of our round nose pliers and we're going to start spiraling this. We'll take the bottom one and spiral it up so that it can cover that stone in place. Just wrapping it around, starting to put a little swirl in here. I'm going to switch over to my chain nose pliers, and if you have the Zuron tweezer nose, they really come into their own here for doing this kind of meticulous shaping. So I'm starting to swirl it up over the stone like that. As you can see, we still have more length than we need, so I'm just going to snip some more of that off and continue shaping that little swirl. Really, really tiny little swirl, just to sit in this spot right here. And I might even take off a little bit more, because we don't want this to be such a big swirl that it actually covers up and hides our beautiful stone that we're using. You just want it to ornament it a little bit. Alright, and I'm just going to gently make sure it's sitting as close to the stone as it can, just by pushing it down there. There we go, and we'll do the same thing with this other one so that we have something like that. Now at this point our stone is thoroughly encased in there, it's not going to go anywhere, but we do have these other ends that we want to finish off. So what I'm going to do for that is take the twisted one And I'm going to create another little spiral that will sit just in this spot here. If I can show you on this finished one. Because we kind of have a little opening right there where nothing's going on, we'll just take the twisted wires and place little spirals in there. And then for the smooth wires, the untwisted ones, I'm just going to push them down against the top of the band here and snip them off. Just before they start wrapping around the side is where I'm going to snip them off. And then you can use your chain nose pliers to push that cut end down really tightly so that it kind of smashes the end and smooths it out and helps seal it against the band. So you can check with your fingers there's not going to be a scratchy end that can catch on clothing or anything. Yep, so nice and smooth, and we'll do the same thing on the other side. Alright, so we're almost done. We're just going to make those little swirls with these twisted wire ends that we have here. So I think these are going to be a little bit longer than we need as well, so I'm just going to take my flush cutters to remove a little length from those, making sure they're the same length on either side. And for these, I'm going to take the right one and curl it down towards the stone, so swirling it like that. Again, making a very tight little spiral, and we're just going to sit it in that open space right there. And I might need to take off a little bit more of it as well. This is turning into a larger spiral than I wanted. So we'll just snip off a teensy bit more. And for removing wire, I like to go little bits at a time. That's why I keep having to remove more. It's better to cut less than you need and have to cut a little more than to take off too much, because you can't put it back after you take it off. So we're just going to push that little spiral into that space right there. It's filled it in pretty nicely. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side. Again, using our round nose pliers to swirl that on around and make a really tight little spiral who can sit in that spot. Alright, and I'm just going to double check that everything is sitting where I want it to, kind of pinch everything down to secure it. And that is our finished ring. Let me pop this off so I can put it on for you. And there you go. So size 7, just like we wanted. And as you can see, it's got those nice decorative little swirls. Very comfortable band because of being wrapped in that half round wire. It's very smooth and comfy to wear. And at this point, if you like, you can go ahead and antique or oxidize this. This is what it looks like in the copper if you do antique it. And I have done a tutorial on how I antique my copper using liver of sulfur. I will leave a link to that if you're curious about checking that out. It should pop up here. If not, just click the little lowercase I icon right there and that'll open it up for you. But that's what it looks like antiqued. And of course you can make it in lots of different metal types. Here it is in sterling silver with a kind of more blue colored labradorite. Very pretty as well. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, found it helpful and easy to follow. If you did, please leave me a like on the video and also subscribe so that you can be notified of future content I post like this. And also feel free to comment below if you ran into any problems, had questions making this along the way. I will try and answer those for you. And I'm also always happy to hear of ideas you guys might have for future tutorials. This one was kind of requested. A couple folks were interested in more ring designs as well as designs that use stones in them. But as always, I really appreciate you being here and watching. Thank you so much. I will catch you in the next video. Happy crafting!